When the lawyer handed over the deed to the rotting, rat-infested barn, the laughter in the room was deafening. Her family thought they had delivered the ultimate humiliating blow. They didn't know that beneath those decaying floorboards lay a $50 million secret that was about to destroy their perfect lives. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Pendleton, Hayes and Carmichael on Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, smelled of expensive leather, aged scotch, and naked greed. Outside, the autumn rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, weeping shadows across the faces of the Harrington family. But inside, the atmosphere was practically festive. Clara Harrington sat at the far end of the immense table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. At 28, she was the eldest child of the late Theodore Harrington, a titan of the New York real estate development world. Yet, looking at her, one would never guess her lineage. While her stepmother, Victoria, draped herself in a black mink coat and a carefully calculated expression of fashionable mourning, Clara wore a simple, off-the-rack navy blazer. Across from Clara sat her half-siblings, Preston and Chloe. Preston, a 30-year-old amateur venture capitalist who had never worked a hard day in his life, was busy checking his Rolex. Chloe, 25, and fresh off a spiritual retreat in Bali that had somehow cost $50,000, was reapplying her lip gloss, using the reflection of her phone screen. None of them had been there when Theodore took his final, rattling breaths 3 weeks ago. None of them had held his hand, wiped his brow, or managed his grueling medication schedule during his 2-year battle with pancreatic cancer. That burden had fallen entirely on Clara. She had put her own career as a historical archivist on hold, moving back into the stifling, oppressive atmosphere of the Harrington estate in the Hudson Valley, to care for the father who had, for most of her life, kept her at arm's length to appease his second wife. Arthur Pendleton, the senior partner and Theodore's lifelong attorney, cleared his throat. He was an older man, with wire-rimmed glasses and a deeply uncomfortable expression. He glanced at Clara, a flicker of genuine pity in his eyes, before looking down at the heavy, wax-sealed document in his hands. "If we are all ready," Mr. Pendleton began, his voice dry and raspy, "I will now read the last will and testament of Theodore Reginald Harrington." Victoria sat up straighter, her eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. The reading began as expected. The liquid assets, amounting to roughly $85 million in offshore accounts and diversified stock portfolios, were divided generously among Victoria, Preston, and Chloe. The sprawling 60-acre Hudson Valley estate, complete with the 20-room mansion, the private lake, and the manicured equestrian facilities, was left to Victoria in its entirety. The luxury penthouses in Manhattan and Miami were split between the two half-siblings. With every asset listed, Preston's smirk grew wider, and Chloe let out tiny, contented sighs. Clara simply stared at her hands. She hadn't expected millions. She had always been the outsider, the physical reminder of Theodore's first, deeply loved wife, Sarah, who had died in a tragic car accident when Clara was just an infant. Victoria had spent the next 2 decades systematically erasing Sarah's memory and pushing Clara to the margins of the family. Clara only hoped for a small stipend, perhaps enough to finish her master's degree, or the small cottage on the south end of the estate where she had lived while nursing her father. And finally, Mr. Pendleton said, his voice dropping an octave. He shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "To my eldest daughter, Clara Harrington." The room went dead silent. Victoria paused, her delicate sipping of sparkling water. Preston leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. I leave the parcel of land situated on the northernmost ridge of the Dutchess County property, encompassing exactly 1.5 acres, and the structure upon it, known as the Old Miller Barn. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence stretched, tight and brittle. And then Preston let out a sharp, barking laugh. "The barn?" Preston choked out, slapping the mahogany table. "He left her the barn?" Chloe burst into a fit of giggles, hiding her face behind her manicured hand. "Oh my God. You mean that collapsed pile of rotting wood by the old highway, the one with the raccoons?" Victoria didn't laugh, but a slow, venomous smile spread across her flawless, surgically tightened face. "Well," she purred, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "your father always did say you had a rustic sensibility, Clara. I suppose it's fitting. You can finally have a place of your own. Once you clear out the toxic mold and the bat guano, of course." Clara felt the blood rush to her cheeks. The Old Miller Barn was a local eyesore. It had been abandoned since the 1970s, a crumbling, weather-beaten structure that the town council had repeatedly cited for safety violations. Theodore had always threatened to bulldoze it, but never got around to it. "Mr. Pendleton," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to keep it steady. Is there anything else? A message? A letter?" The lawyer looked at her with profound sorrow. "I am sorry, Clara. The will is absolute. The barn and the immediate acre surrounding it are legally yours, free and clear. The rest of the estate belongs to Victoria." "Which means," Victoria interrupted, her tone suddenly turning icy and businesslike, "I will need you out of the guest house by Friday. I have contractors coming in to renovate. We're turning your old room into a Pilates studio for Chloe." "Friday," Clara whispered. "Victoria, that's 3 days. I have nowhere to go. All my savings went toward—" She stopped herself. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of hearing her say that her savings had gone toward the out-of-pocket holistic treatments Theodore had begged for at the end. "That sounds like a personal problem, Clara," Preston sneered, standing up and buttoning his bespoke Italian suit. "You have property now. Go pitch a tent in your barn. Just make sure you stay on your side of the property line. I'll have security patrol the ridge." They left her sitting there in the echoing conference room. The humiliation washed over her in suffocating waves. Her father, the man she had bathed, fed, and comforted as he wept in the dark hours of the night, had allowed Victoria to write him a script of ultimate cruelty. He had let them discard her like garbage. Mr. Pendleton slowly packed his briefcase. "Clara," he said softly, "I tried to talk him out of it. Several times. In his final months, his mind, it was clouded. Victoria was always in the room when we drafted the revisions." "It's fine, Arthur," Clara said, standing up and smoothing her cheap blazer. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but her jaw was set like granite. "I expected nothing. They just wanted to make sure the nothing had a punchline." She took the heavy manila folder containing the deed to the Old Miller Barn. It felt like a lead weight in her hands. The drive up to Dutchess County took 2 hours. Clara's 2012 Honda Civic rattled over the familiar, winding country roads. The autumn leaves were a brilliant, violent clash of red and gold, a stark contrast to the hollow emptiness expanding inside her chest. She didn't go to the main house. She couldn't stomach the sight of Victoria's luxury SUVs parked in the circular driveway, or the sounds of Preston loudly celebrating his newfound fortune on the terrace. Instead, she took the crumbling, unmarked dirt road that branched off the main highway, winding her way up the northern ridge. The Old Miller Barn loomed at the end of the overgrown path, looking even worse than she remembered. It was a massive, looming structure of weathered grey timber, sagging heavily in the middle like an exhausted beast. The roof was missing several corrugated tin panels, leaving it open to the elements. The massive front doors were chained shut with a rusted padlock, and thorny blackberry brambles had swallowed the lower half of the building. It smelled intensely of wet rot, decaying leaves, and abandonment. Clara parked her car, killed the engine, and just stared at it through the windshield. The sheer cruelty of the bequest threatened to break her. This was her inheritance. A hazardous waste site. "Don't cry," she told herself fiercely, gripping the steering wheel until her hands ached. "If you cry, they win." She got out of the car, retrieved a heavy pair of bolt cutters from her trunk — she had stopped at a hardware store on the way up — and marched through the knee-high weeds. The rusted chain snapped with a loud metallic crack, and the heavy wooden doors groaned in protest as she pushed them open. The interior was a cavern of shadows and dust. Shafts of pale afternoon light pierced through the holes in the roof, illuminating floating motes of dust and centuries of accumulated filth. The barn was packed to the rafters with absolute junk. Rusted tractor parts, mounds of decaying hay, broken furniture from the 1980s, shattered glass, and forgotten wooden crates piled haphazardly against the far walls. It was a monumental task. But as Clara stood there, breathing in the musty air, a strange, stubborn fire ignited in her stomach. Victoria and Preston expected her to walk away. They expected her to surrender the deed to them just to avoid the property taxes, allowing them to finally bulldoze it and sell the acreage to developers. "Not a chance," Clara whispered to the empty barn. Over the next 3 days, Clara worked like a woman possessed. She moved her meager belongings out of the main estate under the watchful, mocking eyes of Victoria's private security guards. She spent the last of her dwindling savings renting a heavy-duty dumpster and buying industrial cleaning supplies, work gloves, and a high-powered flashlight. She set up a temporary camp in the only dry corner of the barn, sleeping on a cheap air mattress. By the 4th day, her hands were blistered, her back screamed in agony, and she was covered head to toe in black grime. She had cleared out the center of the barn, dragging hundreds of pounds of rusted metal and rotting wood out to the dumpster. It was late Tuesday evening, and a heavy thunderstorm was rolling over the Hudson Valley. Rain drummed deafeningly against the tin roof. Clara was using an iron crowbar to pry up a pile of fused, waterlogged floorboards near the back of the barn, trying to clear the area before the rot spread to the structural pillars. She jammed the crowbar deep into the wood and threw her weight backward. The wood splintered with a loud crack, tearing away a large chunk of the floor. Clara stumbled back, wiping sweat and dirt from her forehead. She shined her flashlight into the gap she had just created, expecting to see dirt and maybe a rat's nest. Instead, the beam of light bounced off something dull, grey, and completely unnatural. Clara froze. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the splinters, and aimed the light directly into the hole. Beneath the century-old wooden floorboards, there was no dirt. There was a layer of poured, high-density industrial concrete. And set perfectly flush into the concrete was a heavy, circular steel hatch. It looked exactly like the pressure doors used on naval submarines. In the center of the hatch was a massive, complex digital keypad and a biometric thumb scanner. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. "What in the world?" she muttered, her voice trembling. She grabbed the crowbar and began frantically tearing at the surrounding floorboards, the exhaustion vanishing from her muscles, replaced by a massive surge of adrenaline. Wood splintered and flew around her. Within 20 minutes, she had cleared a 6-by-6-foot section of the barn floor, entirely exposing the massive steel door. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't old. The steel was pristine, coated in a fine layer of dust, but clearly modern. There was a small, glowing green LED light pulsing faintly near the keypad, indicating that wherever this door led, it had its own active power source. Clara sat back on her heels, her mind racing. Her father was a real estate developer. He built luxury condos and shopping centers. Why would there be a high-tech, military-grade bunker hidden beneath an abandoned barn on the edge of his property? And more importantly, why did he specifically leave this exact piece of land to her? In his final months, his mind, it was clouded. Victoria was always in the room when we drafted the revisions. Mr. Pendleton's words echoed in her head. But what if Theodore's mind hadn't been clouded at all? What if he had been perfectly lucid? He knew Victoria was watching his every move, monitoring his bank accounts, dictating his will. If he wanted to leave Clara something substantial, he couldn't do it on paper. Victoria's lawyers would have tied it up in probate court for decades. He had to hide it. He had to hide it in the one place Victoria would never, ever look. The one place she would consider a humiliating insult. Clara stared at the keypad. She didn't know the code. She tentatively reached out and placed her thumb on the biometric scanner. The machine beeped angrily, and a red light flashed. Access denied. Frustration welled up inside her. She was so close. She began to desperately search her memory. Birthdays, anniversaries, the day Sarah died. She tried Theodore's birthday. Error. She tried her own. Error. She tried the street number of his childhood home. Error. She sat on the cold concrete, running her blistered hands through her dust-caked hair. Think, Clara. Think he left this for you. He wouldn't lock you out permanently. She thought back to his final days, the long, quiet nights in the hospice suite. He had been heavily medicated, slipping in and out of lucidity. But on the very last night, just hours before he slipped into a coma, he had gripped her hand with surprising, desperate strength. He had pulled her close, his breathing ragged, and whispered something she hadn't understood at the time. She had thought it was the morphine talking. The day we met, Clara. The day you finally met her. That's the key. Always remember the day you met her. Clara's blood ran cold. She had always assumed he was hallucinating about her mother, Sarah. But Clara had never met Sarah. Sarah died when Clara was 3 months old. Unless... He didn't mean Sarah. When Clara was 12 years old, Theodore had taken her on a rare, secret weekend trip, away from Victoria's prying eyes. They had driven to a private dock in Maryland. There, Theodore had shown her a beautifully restored, vintage 1930s wooden sailboat. He had named the boat the Lady Sra, after her mother. "This is her, Clara," Theodore had said that day, wiping a tear from his eye. "I built her for you. Meet your mother's namesake." Clara scrambled toward her backpack, pulling out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely type. She searched her cloud storage for the digital scans of her old childhood diaries. She frantically scrolled through the years, searching for that specific weekend trip to Maryland. August 14th, 2010. 0814201. Oh. Clara crawled back to the steel hatch. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her finger hovering over the glowing digital keypad. Beep, 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 beep. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The barn was dead silent, except for the rain pounding on the roof. Then a loud, mechanical clack echoed from deep within the concrete. The red light on the keypad turned a brilliant, solid green. The heavy steel wheel in the center of the hatch slowly, automatically, began to turn on its own, the sound of pressurized air hissing from the seal. Clara pushed the heavy hatch upward. It swung open on hydraulic hinges, revealing a brightly lit, spiral metal staircase leading deep into the earth. The air that wafted up wasn't stale or damp. It was crisp, cool, and climate-controlled. Clara grabbed her flashlight, though she didn't need it anymore, and slowly began to descend into the bunker, leaving the rotting, discarded world of her family behind her. She had no idea that the moment her feet touched the floor of the lower level, the Harrington family empire was destined to burn to the ground. The spiral staircase seemed endless. When Clara finally stepped off the metal steps, her boots hit a solid concrete floor. She stood completely frozen. The extreme contrast between the decaying wooden barn above and this subterranean hidden vault below was absolutely staggering. This was not a simple storm shelter. It was a highly advanced, fully climate-controlled command center. The wide walls were lined with sleek steel cabinets and glowing digital server racks that hummed with quiet, steady electrical power. Bright recessed lighting illuminated the entire space, revealing a heavy mahogany desk perfectly in the exact center. It was a perfect replica of her father's office desk. Clara slowly approached the dark wood. Sitting perfectly centered on the pristine leather surface was a thick journal, a small black velvet box, and a large manila envelope. Her full name was written across the paper envelope in her father's unmistakable sharp handwriting. Her fingers trembled badly as she ripped the thick paper open. Inside was a single handwritten letter. She took a deep breath. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this specific letter, it means you successfully deciphered the passcode. I am so deeply sorry for everything. I am sorry for the terrible cruelty you endured during the official reading of my will. I had to let Victoria believe she had completely won. I had to let her think she successfully stripped you of your entire inheritance. It was the only possible way to protect you from her wrath, and the only way to protect my true legacy." Clara gasped loudly, pressing a shaking hand over her mouth. She kept reading. "Over the last 5 years, I discovered Victoria and Preston were systematically embezzling money from our family company. They were laundering millions through fake corporate entities located in the Cayman Islands. I was quietly building a massive legal case against them. But then I got terribly sick. When my mind began to fail me, I knew they would manipulate my lawyers and alter my final will. So I outmaneuvered them both. I covertly liquidated my most valuable, completely untraceable physical assets and relocated everything down here." Clara opened the small black velvet box. Inside rested a sleek metal digital hardware wallet and a set of engraved brass keys. "This secure vault contains $50 million in untraceable liquid assets. But much more importantly, the tall computer servers behind you hold every single piece of digital evidence needed to send Victoria and Preston to federal prison for a very long time. The financial algorithms I used to track their hidden offshore accounts were highly complex." Clara glanced toward a white dry erase board mounted near the tall server racks. Her father had mathematically mapped out their money laundering algorithm. He meticulously calculated exactly how much money they stole over the years. Clara opened the heavy steel security cabinets lining the far wall. She immediately staggered backward in pure shock. Stacked in perfect, gleaming rows, she saw hundreds of certified gold bullion bars, sitting right alongside thick stacks of bearer bonds from major international banks. This was not just immense wealth, this was absolute, unchecked power. He knew absolutely everything. Her father had not abandoned her. He had secretly weaponized her. He had handed her the ultimate sword to sever the rotting branches of their corrupted family tree. The terrible humiliation at the lawyer's office had not been a defeat. It had been a brilliant tactical retreat orchestrated by a dying chess master. A profound, icy calm washed over Clara. The terrified daughter who wept was gone forever. In her place stood the sole legitimate heir to the massive Harrington empire. Friday morning arrived with crisp, biting autumn air. Victoria Harrington stood on the back stone terrace of the main estate, casually sipping a sweet fruit drink and watching a hired team of local contractors unload heavy metal scaffolding. She wore a pristine white luxury sweater, painting a perfect picture of victorious elegance. Beside her, Preston was loudly brokering a new business deal on his cellular phone, already spending money he did not technically possess yet. A nervous voice suddenly interrupted them completely. Victoria turned around to see the head of private security, a burly man named Mitchell, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. "What is it, Mitchell?" Victoria sighed with deep annoyance. "I specifically told you to make sure Clara was permanently off the property by 9 this morning. It is currently 9:30. She is off the main property," Mitchell said softly, clearing his throat. "But she is down at the end of the main driveway, and she brought several guests with her today." Victoria frowned deeply, setting down her expensive crystal glass. "Guests? What kind of guests? If she brought some cheap movers, tell them to immediately use the back service entrance." "They are not movers," Mitchell replied. "It is the federal authorities. And Mr. Pendleton." Preston stopped speaking immediately, slowly lowering his cellular phone. All the color instantly drained from his arrogant face. "What did you just say?" Before Mitchell could even answer, a large convoy of 4 black government vehicles and the silver luxury sedan belonging to Mr. Pendleton swept up the long, perfectly manicured driveway, completely bypassing the front security gates. They parked aggressively in a wide semicircle, physically blocking the luxury sport utility vehicles from leaving today. The heavy car doors opened simultaneously, and a dozen serious agents in dark windbreakers stepped out. But it was the single figure emerging from the silver sedan that made Victoria stop breathing. Clara stepped confidently onto the crushed gravel. She was no longer wearing the cheap navy blue blazer from the lawyer office. She wore a fiercely tailored, dark charcoal designer suit she had purchased yesterday morning in Manhattan. Her posture was completely rigid, and her dark eyes burned with an intense, unyielding fire. She carried a thick, expensive leather briefcase in her right hand. Victoria shrieked loudly, desperately recovering her shattered composure and marching toward the stone steps. "What is the exact meaning of this? You are legally trespassing. Mitchell, remove her right now." Mitchell did not move a single muscle. The federal agents quickly fanned out, completely securing the perimeter of the large terrace. "She is not trespassing, Victoria," Mr. Pendleton said, his deep voice ringing with a brand new, sharp authority. He looked entirely different from the defeated, quiet old man sitting in the legal conference room. He looked incredibly vindicated. "Miss Harrington is here on official government business today." "Official business?" Preston scoffed loudly, his voice cracking slightly under the sudden pressure. She owns a worthless pile of rotting wood. I am calling our corporate lawyers immediately. You will definitely need them, Clara said, stepping boldly up onto the terrace. She did not raise her voice at all, but the sheer coldness of her tone silenced Preston immediately. Agent Harris, if you would please. A tall, stern-faced agent stepped forward, handing a thick stack of official legal warrants directly to Victoria. Victoria Harrington and Preston Harrington, we have federal warrants for the immediate seizure of this property, your personal electronics, and all financial documents completely. Seizure? Victoria gasped quietly, her beautifully manicured hands trembling wildly. On what possible grounds? Clara slowly unlatched her heavy briefcase and pulled out the printed decryption logs from the underground bunker servers. On the legal grounds of international wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and massive tax evasion, Clara said smoothly. Did you really think my father was just a senile, foolish old man? He spent the last 5 entire years tracking your fake shell companies in the Caymans. He meticulously documented every single stolen cent. Preston lunged forward angrily. You are lying! He was completely brain-dead the last 6 months. He was acting, Clara corrected firmly. Your fake empire is completely finished. I highly suggest you buy a good broom. If you loved this incredible story about absolute revenge and ultimate justice, please smash that like button right now. Share this amazing dramatic video with all your friends who love massive plot twists, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling daily stories. Leave a comment below telling us what you would do with $50 million. We read every single comment and love hearing your thoughts. See you in the next exciting adventure very soon.